everybody? Welcome in to another episode of the NFL Seekers podcast. Today, we are going to be predicting and deep diving into the AFC South. We'll be talking about each team's offseason, starting lineups, and at the end, we'll each predict the division winner. Super exciting division with some young, exciting quarterbacks. How are you, Josh?
Doing good. Glad to be back on the show. Been going through a move, so it's been kind of hectic the last week. So Shane thankfully was able to step in my spot and do a couple, but we're glad to have that nerd off the podcast for our deep dives. But I'm super excited to talk about the AFC South. Like you mentioned, a lot of young, exciting quarterbacks. I mean, all across the board. I mean, so you got Trevor, you got CJ Stroud. You got Will Levis, and so and then Anthony Richardson. So I mean, this is just a young, full, fun division full of lots of potential, a lot of young rising stars. So it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see who can take the next steps up this year.
Yeah, glad to have you back. And yeah, I think a lot of this episode will be talked about just or we'll talk about these young stars because I'm really excited to get into CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson, Trevor Lawrence. So we'll get into the 2022 recap, and it was kind of a rough year for the AFC South. The Jaguars finished with a 9-8 record. They were able to make it to the second round of the playoffs. They lost to the Chiefs, the Super Bowl winners. The Titans finished at second with a 7-10 record. They were a very chippy team in almost every game with a very bad injury luck. So don't sleep on the Titans. I think they're the most underrated team in the NFL this year, and we'll talk about that more. The Colts finished at 4-12-1. They tied with the Texans, who finished at 3-13-1. So those two teams kind of weighed down this division, and it kind of gives this division a bad narrative heading into 2023. It's kind of a negatively talked about and not very much talked about at all. And so the AFC South straight up is just the most underrated division, but the Titans especially are the most underrated team. But I mean, I guess we'll talk about the Texans first, but give your thoughts on the 2022.
Yeah, I mean the Titans were one game out of the playoffs with Josh Dobbs almost leading them to the playoffs. I mean, Trevor and those guys were having an absolute fist fight, till the end. It was a bloodbath. It was week 18, right? And that decided who went to the playoffs. And it was an absolute bloodbath between the two teams. They're going at it, and and their starting quarterback at this point was Josh Dobbs, and he almost beat the Jacksonville Jaguars, who went on to break my heart. Which I wish Josh Dobbs would beat him because the Chargers would have had a better shot at beating the Titans. But yeah, then Trevor Lawrence goes on to, have a 27-point comeback and break my heart, so not thankful for that. I really hate the Jaguars last year. But Doug Peterson and Trevor Lawrence have got a really good thing going. The Colts were very underwhelming last year. So were the Texans, obviously horrible, but I mean, just their draft class this year was so flawless. And I think all this AFC South had such a phenomenal offseason that's not being talked about enough. So they are definitely sleepers. This is the sleeper division this year. So we got to watch out. We can't hate on them too much, but they are a sleeper division. And like you said, especially the Titans.
Yeah, and just a sneak peek, like you said, the Titans were just a game out of the playoffs with the Jaguars last year. I think honestly, the Titans will be a game or two out of the Jaguars record this year as well, and it'll go down right to the end, right to the wire. But let's go into the Texans, who D'Amico Ryans they bring in to be their head coach, who in my opinion was the best head coaching hire of this cycle. He's going to come in and completely change the culture and expectations here, and he's going to do some special things for his former team that he played for. It's a really exciting fit, and D'Amico Ryans is a great defensive mind, and bringing in CJ Stroud, who we'll talk about here in a second, it's going to be a really changed culture, and the Texans can be really fun.
Oh, 100%. And I mean, you this offseason were hounding for the Broncos to get D'Amico Ryans. I don't know if there's anyone higher on D'Amico Ryans than yourself and the Broncos. I know the Broncos definitely offered him the bag. However, he wanted to go to the Texans, and you guys ended up getting Sean Payton, the rest is history. But D'Amico Ryans is such a smart, genius, guru coach who really just helped the 49ers develop their defense into something pretty fantastic. And I mean, he's their biggest offseason addition. I'm so excited to see D'Amico Ryans.
Yep. And then when you look into their offseason, other than D'Amico Ryans, they add CJ Stroud with the second overall pick, who's going to be a cornerstone franchise quarterback for them, a really safe, high floor option that's very accurate and poised in the pocket, but he can definitely develop, and he has some pretty high upside as well. So don't sleep on Stroud. He's going to be awesome with D'Amico Ryans coaching him up. And then they trade up to pick 3 for Will Anderson, the best defensive player in the draft. And one of the more fun draft moments in recent history that I can remember, we were watching it together and we were going crazy. I've never seen anything like that. That was a brilliant move by Caserio, and I'm so excited for this Texans draft. And then some outside free agent pieces they added. Devin Singletary to be the backup running back to Damian Pierce, a similar role to what he was in Buffalo last year. They bring in Dalton Schultz from Dallas, who is easily one of the more underrated offseason additions. No one's really talking about that, but he and Stroud could definitely have a pretty good connection. And they also bring in Robert Woods to start. And then they bring in Shaq Mason from Tampa to be a starting guard. And then on the defensive side, they bring in Sheldon Rankins, who's really good. Denzel Perryman, who's going to really shore up things on their linebacking core. And then Jimmy Ward, who we'll talk about with their defense. But that is a very underrated piece, and he's going to fill in this secondary. And they're going to be a really underrated defense, and no one realizes it.
Oh man, I think the whole Texans in general are just an underrated team. I don't know if they're quite there yet. Um, but I mean, over these next few years, they're going to be something special. And like you said, we were watching the draft together, and once we saw the Texans were on the board at number 3, and we knew they were going Stroud at 2. Let's be real, we knew it. Stroud was always the pick at 2, and then come pick number 3 when they trade up and they get the best defensive player in all the drafts to, give D'Amico Ryan his cornerstone franchise guy on that side of the ball. I just absolutely loved it. It was brilliant. They had the 10th overall pick and they were able to move up 7 spots. And, you get your 2 franchise guys, one on each side of the ball. And that's how you build a team. You got 2 cornerstone pieces, 2 young guys, best of their positions. And it was just such a flawless trade. And I can't believe they actually pulled that off. And then, like you said, bringing in Dalton Schultz, very, very underrated tight end. He had a sneakily really good season with Dallas last year. And that's going to be such a keystone for CJ Stroud, developing as a rookie. Having a good tight end is so crucial. And then another guy, you kind of went through the list, but I'm just going to point out Denzel Perryman. Absolutely phenomenal stud linebacker, started his career out with the Chargers, went to the Raiders. Dude's just controls the middle of the field. So good in pass coverage. So good at stopping the run. I mean, he's a very underrated signing. And watch out for him on this Texans defense with D'Amico Ryans. Absolutely love it.
Yeah, and then the notable losses section is really thin. Really no losses at all, other than Brandon Cooks, who was a very productive receiver for them. He's always a solid receiver, and Agbanio Okoronkwo. But those are the only 2 notable losses. So they definitely got better this offseason, and this is definitely a very big step in the right direction. And like you said, those 2 cornerstones on the roster are huge moving forward.
And hopefully they drafted Tank Dell, which is just a Brandon Cooks replacement. So it all works out. You get rid of a big contract over the next. I'm sure I think they still have a cap hit this year, but they'll move off of that money next year and then have a cheaper guy on a rookie contract, which is just perfect. That's what you want to do, especially when you're building this team up how they are.
Yeah. Speaking of Tank Dell, let's just get into this offense and this roster. And we'll start with the receiving core, which they have Nico Collins, John Mechie, and Robert Woods listed as the starters right now. And then rookies Tank Dell and Xavier Hutchinson are going to come in as the wide receiver, or I guess just the backups. And they're going to be pretty good replacements. I think Tank Dell, especially, CJ Stroud really wanted him after he was drafted. He told the Texans to go pair him up with Tank Dell, which is kind of random. I don't know how he was watching a bunch of Houston tape, but he's an exciting young flashy player. He's just really short, but if he can stay on the field and stay healthy, he's going to be really good. And then they have Noah Brown, who was a wide receiver 4 for the Cowboys, and he was actually really good. So that's kind of an underrated signing. So that 6 isn't terrible. Robert Woods is a good veteran, and then John Mechie, who didn't play last year, is looking pretty good in camp, and he's a solid option that could be pretty reliable for CJ Stroud. How do you like that receiving core, though?
I like it. Definitely no big star power on it yet. They don't have their big flashy Jefferson, Keenan Allen, Jerry Judy type guy yet. But, this is very solid. And I do like the depth of Noah Brown and Xavier Hutchinson. And it's very young. exciting group with a little bit of veteran presence, with Robert Woods in there. So I think it's a very capable. I don't think it's very elite, but very solid and very capable receiving core that I like for CJ Stroud entering the NFL. I'd like him to see maybe next year draft a first round receiver, but as of right now, I really do like it. And maybe, John Mechie or, Tank Dell will turn into one of these elite guys. But right now, it's just on paper, it's just solid.
Yeah, I know they traded a lot of picks, but imagine they paired C.J. Stroud with Jackson Smith, or not Jackson Smith, but Marvin Harrison or Amika Ibuka next year. That'd be really
Oh,
fun
man.
if they could get a
Oh,
first. That'd be
Marvin
great.
Harrison Jr. Oh my God, that would be awesome. That
And
would be.
even if that's unrealistic, even Amika Ibuka, he could be a top 10 receiver too. Either one. He had a
Yeah,
great
he's number 2, right? He looks kind of like Chris Olave.
Olave. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. I gotta go through and watch some Ohio State tape, but that dude was good. I think I was
yeah.
watching the Georgia game, and holy cow, keep an eye out for him because he's turning into something special, man. These Ohio State receivers, wow. I don't know what they're feeding them over there, but damn, they are good.
That's ridiculous, man. Stroud had a great connection with both of them all year. But yeah, speaking of Stroud, he's just a great quarterback, super accurate, solid. Like you guys, when you watch him, you'll be pretty surprised about how accurate he is. He can make some beautiful throws. He drops them into buckets anywhere in the field. He's a really fun prospect. Definitely deserved that second overall pedigree. Really excited for him. Not too much we could say about him. And as we saw in that Georgia game in the playoffs, he was really mobile and moving around, throwing on the run. He dominated Georgia. I watched every snap of that play multiple
Mm.
times now, and I don't know if he had a bad play. And that was against Georgia, one of the better defenses we've ever seen. It was incredible, that performance. I really am optimistic for his future because of that performance.
Oh man, that's what got me. I actually at one point had him as my number one ranked quarterback. If you go back and you watch if you're an OG NFL seeker, you go back and you watch some of our first podcasts and we are going all in on the draft. You'd see that I had CJ Stroud ranked as number one, and I kind of still stand by it. I think his pocket presence, his size was just more elite than anyone else in this class. And the game against a Georgia defense who's as good as any, honestly, in my opinion, it's as good as any NFL defense, especially last year, the last 2 years. I mean, they've had multiple first round picks, more than you'd see on any NFL defense. So that defense is top tier, elite. And, CJ Stroud arguably had the greatest game ever, against them. And they still somehow managed to lose, which is sad. But I mean, CJ Stroud, it wasn't because of him.
Yeah, brilliant play. I'm really excited to see what he can do as a rookie. When you go into the backfield, they've got a thunder and lightning approach with Dameon Pierce, and then they bring in Devin Singletary. Dameon Pierce was really good as a rookie. He's a bowling ball of a running back. He reminds me of Javonte Williams, and really excited to see what he can do this year as the starter. And then their offensive line is actually pretty solid, bringing in Shaq Mason. They've got Laramie Tunzel, who, in my opinion, was the best left tackle in the NFL last year, and especially considering he was on the Texans, which wasn't a very great situation to be in. Kenyon Green did struggle a little bit, but I liked him as a prospect, so hopefully he can be a little bit better. Drew Scruggs in the second round is definitely the weak link of this offensive line, and he's going to have to prove himself. I think the second round was a little bit high for him. I'm just going to say
Yeah, that
that.
was an interesting pick. That was an interesting pick. That was a head scratcher for sure.
Especially when Luke Whippler, CJ Stroud center, went in like the fifth round, and I had him a higher grade on him. So that was a questionable pick. Shaq Mason's a super solid guard, and Titus Howard has really improved and been a great right tackle the last few years. So other than two players on the interior, it's a pretty solid offensive line. And then, like we said, Dalton Schultz, who's definitely going to have a pretty good connection with CJ Stroud, just both of us knowing the type of players that they are. It's pretty obvious that Stroud is going to love Schultz as a security blanket.
100%. And Dameon Pierce, absolutely love him. I think he's I think he's going to really be something special. I mean, his forced missed tackle rate, unbelievable. I mean, the dude, like you said, is just a bowling ball. But overall, I mean, I really like this offense. I think it's really solid. I don't think I don't think they're amazing at any position, but I think they're just really solid at every position. And I do like their depth from receiver to running back, and I do like their line. Juice Scruggs is definitely a head scratcher. But I mean, when you have Laramie Tunzel, Tyus Howard, Shaq Mason, Kenyon Green, I think that line will grow into something pretty special. And um, I don't hate their depth either, you know. So I just slap a very solid grade on them. I don't really have a grade yet, but it's just solid. If I could just say solid, it's a solid defense. I mean, sorry, solid offense. And I just really like the coaching staff, and I like what this team could possibly be in the next couple of years.
No, yeah, this team is going to be scrappy. D'Amico Ryans is going to have them playing scrappy. The roster is honestly pretty scrappy, and we'll get into the defense, which it honestly surprised me looking over their depth and starting lineup. It's going to be pretty scrappy as well. Starting with the defensive line, coached by D'Amico Ryans, who has these guys doing stunts that the NFL's never seen before. They just move around like Tasmanian devils, and it's going to be a very great scheme for Will Anderson to completely dominate and burst onto the scene as a rookie. I think he can definitely be. He's going to be like a defensive rookie of the year favorite, but I think he could be like a defensive player of the year candidate here in the next few years. He's a beast. You got Jonathan Granard and Dylan Horton and Jerry Hughes, so a pretty heavy edge rotation, and even the defensive line interior is pretty deep. Bringing in Sheldon Rankins, so I and Hassan Ridgeway from San Fran with Ryan, so really solid defensive line. Christian Harris is the middle linebacker, had a lot of upside. He wasn't the best as a rookie, but he's going to start this year, and I think he can be pretty good alongside Denzel Perryman and Corey Littleton, who they bring in. Steven Nelson is their number one corner, is an absolute beast. He's been really underrated the last few years. He was great last year. They bring in Derek Stingley, who was the third overall pick last year, who I absolutely loved. And then they have Desmond King and Tavier Thomas in the slot. So honestly, a pretty underrated corner room. And then Jalen Petrie and Jimmy Ward as a safety duo is also awesome. So this secondary doesn't have too many holes. And I think D'Amico Ryans is going to have them coached up and very scrappy, and they're gonna be in more games than people think.
Yeah, this is the one of the first times I really looked in depth at their roster, and I'm gonna start where you ended off on that secondary is nice. I really like that. I mean, there's not a player that in their starting secondary that I don't like. Steven Nelson, so underrated. Jimmy Ward, so underrated. Petrie, who was drafted last year, absolute stud. Derek Stingley will probably in the next couple of years and under D'Amico Ryans grow into one of the better corners in the league. And then Desmond King, I know him all too well. Former Charger. This dude is a stud. Stud nickelback, a great slot player, and a very underrated return man. I mean, he can take punts, kick returns. He's had a few house calls, and he's a stud. But absolutely love the secondary. And then again, I talked about Denzel Perryman be one of the underrated signings this year. Love that with Christian Kirksey as his backup, Corey Littleton, Christian Harris. Love it. And then, yeah, Will Anderson, in my opinion, a very Khalil Mack-esque clone who's just going to be one of the better defensive players in the league here soon. So absolutely love this defense. I actually didn't realize how solid it was and how good I feel about it until now, but really, really like this defense.
Yeah, and you mentioned their secondary, how good it's going to be with Ryans coaching them up, and Ryans brings Jimmy Ward over, who's going to be a very good captain of this defense, and he's going to help transition all these young pieces with D'Amico Ryans' defense. And a piece that I didn't even realize is here, Shaquille Griffin, who was paid a bag by the Jaguars, is going to be a backup corner here. So that is awesome depth for this young team. So this Texans team is really upgraded. Their year to turn around is starting.
I love that. Is Jake Hansen? Sorry, I just had to point out that name. That's not the old Utah Jake Hansen, is it?
No, that's Chase Hansen. He's on the same.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I need to look into Jake Hansen. Chase Hansen, the old Utah guy.
Nope. Yeah, Jake Hansen was undrafted last year, but we will move on to the Colts. The Colts are interesting. They had my favorite draft class this year by far of any team. To be honest, they had like 20 picks, so they definitely had a lot of darts to throw. But I loved their draft class, and they brought in the man Anthony Richardson, who's just going to be an absolute. The sky's the limit for the guy. He has so much upside. He's probably the most physically talented quarterback we've seen in years, and I guess we'll just get into their offseason because Anthony Richardson's that guy, and he's the whole Colts future. I'm so excited for Anthony Richardson personally. I really think that he can be very special. Obviously, the upside's limitless, but I think he can be special as a rookie. I think he has a higher floor than people realize, and I think he's gonna have this Colts team in games this year, which is surprising to people.
Oh yeah. You've really Anthony Richardson's really grown on you this offseason. I've kind of watched you and hearing you talk about him. You're really loving the dude. And I really like Anthony Richardson. I think there's a lot of development to do, but the traits are off the charts. I mean, you can't measure this guy's athleticism and speed and everything because it is just ridiculous. He's the most athletic quarterback we've ever seen come out of the draft ever. I mean, his his physical tools are beyond what any we've ever seen. And what is the key piece to all this was new head coach now, Shane Steichen, who look at Justin Herbert's rookie season, like what he was able to do. Think about Jalen Hurts. His first it wasn't he's had 2 years with Jalen Hurts now, right?
Yep.
But yeah, think about the development he's had Jalen Hurts go through. Think about the development he's had Justin Herbert go through. I mean, Shane Steichen is an absolute quarterback guru. And so Anthony Richardson couldn't be going into a better system. And, he's going to have everything he needs to succeed here in Indianapolis. And it's just starting with Shane Steichen. He's going to have an ultimate guru coach who I'm so excited to see.
Yeah, I mean, you saw what he did with Jalen Hurts, and Anthony Richardson has got a crazy, crazy arm, much more talented than Hurts' arm, and we know that he's more athletic than Hurts on the ground, which says a lot. So
the QB sneak, oh my gosh, it's
yeah,
gonna
with how
it's
big
gonna
he
be
is,
overpowered, especially with Quentin Nelson up front. Oh my gosh, I just
just
realized
thinking
that.
of him jumping over the line and reaching over, he is so big. He's a tower already. He's gonna score a lot of touchdowns and be like a fantasy football sleeper. And I mean, I just think he's gonna be really good. We'll talk about him a little bit more. I wanted to ask you your thoughts on this whole Jonathan Taylor situation real quick before we talk about the rest of the offseason, because this is their star player. This is their best player. This is their superstar. So is he going to be playing with the Colts in 2023?
It's such a muddy mess right now, and I don't know. I like it's freaky. Like it's a muddy mess, and I don't know. I really don't know. It seems like they've just the management, Ursay, the owner, they haven't been going about this process very well, and they've been kind of saying things that they're kind of sticking their foot in their mouth, and it just seems to be getting more toxic. And it was kind of random. All of a sudden, Jonathan Taylor, he's still on his rookie contract. It's just all of a sudden holding out. This whole running back, not getting paid, which I mean, I get it. Running backs are very, very important to the NFL, and offenses run through good running backs. But for whatever reason, they're more like a dime a dozen, these Super Bowl winning teams. And this is just my opinion, but these Super Bowl winning teams don't pay running backs. They have 7th round Isaiah Pacheco's, and they have, LeGarrette Blunts, and they have, you think of James White's, and, they have all these guys that just aren't elite top tier running backs, and they're putting their assets and, their money in more premium positions like corner and wide receiver and line. And for whatever reason, even for the top guys, it doesn't seem fair. But running backs just aren't getting paid, and there's a reason to it. And so I don't know. I think they'll come to a resolution. I think they'll give him an extension. I think they will fix it, but it is kind of muddy, and I can't say for sure.
Yeah, it's really hard to say. Like you can't really predict it, especially with Ursay. No one can predict what's going on in that man's mind. So we're gonna proceed with this episode as if JT stays. I hope he does for his sake and for the Colts' sake. He's great. He's done some great things for that team. We'll talk about the rest of their offseason. Hopefully Jonathan Taylor stays, but they brought in Gardner Minshew to be a solid backup to Anthony Richardson. They bring in Isaiah McKenzie to be the starting slot, while 3rd-round pick Josh Downs develops into that eventual slot role, and he's going to be a great slot. We'll talk about him in a minute. And then they bring in Juju Julius-Brents in the 2nd round to be a starting corner to replace Stephon Gilmore, who was their biggest loss. And then they bring in Samson Abukim from the 49ers, who's going to be a really good edge rusher. And their notable losses, other than Stephon Gilmore, aren't too notable. They lost Yannick Ngakoue, who signed with the Bears yesterday. Bobby Okereke is a beast. He's going to be good for the Giants. So is Paris Campbell. And Matt Ryan isn't very much of a loss.
No, not at all. Getting rid of Matt Ryan's quite a big upgrade. The Colts have been going through an absolute quarterback carousel of old guys from, Philip Rivers, rightfully so, is actually pretty good, but he only played one season and retired, but led him to the playoffs. And then that went to Carson Wentz, who they actually traded quite a bit for him, but we're able to get 2/3 back for him, which I'm surprised they're able to get anything for him. And then going on to old aging Matt Ryan, and it just hasn't worked out. So, and I was kind of laughing when they signed Gardner Minshew because we have a buddy that likes the Colts, and he just reminds me of our buddy Don, a Don type player that I call him, the Gardner Minshew swag. It's just funny. But he's a solid backup. He's probably one of the better league backups. Gardner Minshew is very underrated as a backup. But yeah, bringing in or drafting Josh Downs was one of my favorite receivers, and getting him in the third round is an absolute steal for Anthony Richardson. And then, yeah, Yannick Ngakoue is a loss. I don't like that. And Stephon Gilmore, that does hurt. But Julius Brent's one of the more underrated corners, too. So they had definitely a lot of picks to replace their notable losses. But overall, I love their offseason.
Yep. And with that, we'll get into their roster. And I personally think they need to start Anthony Richardson week one. I think you will. I'm pretty sure it's a given, but Anthony Richardson just has so much talent, and the more he plays, the more he'll develop. And he's a very fast developer. If you watch him back at Florida, he'll make a very clear mistake on tape, and then he'll come back in that same game, and he'll be mentally prepared to go back in that same situation and completely fix his mistake. And he already developed in the span of a game. So he's a really fast developer, and we saw that multiple times. And his 1 year starting, he got better. So the sky is truly the limit with Anthony Richardson. We haven't really seen anyone like this guy. And like you said, I have just been getting so high on Anthony Richardson this offseason. The more I watch him, the more I think about what he can do in that Jalen Hurts rule of Shane Steichen. I'm just so excited for him. I can't even hide it. I think he's going to be the next big thing in the NFL. And then we have to start with the running back room because it's muddy. You got Jonathan Taylor, who's great. Zach Moss, who just broke his arm, so he's going to miss a few months. And then they got Evan Hull in the 5th round, who's a decent running back. They brought in Kenyon Drake yesterday for some Jonathan Taylor insurance just in case. So there's some pieces here, but if they don't have their best player, Jonathan Taylor, it's not going to fare too well.
No, no. And going over their whole offense again, I feel very solid about it, but I don't feel as excited as the Texans. Anthony Richardson is the true thing that makes me excited about this offense and what it can be. And I do like their line. I really do think they have, from Braden Smith, Will Fries, Ryan Kelly, Quentin Nelson, and then I think they have really good backups in drafting Blake Freeland, Danny Pinter. So I really overall like their depth, and I really like their line. Their receiver core, starting with Michael Pittman Jr., really like him. Alec Pierce to me is kind of unproven. Really like Josh Downs. Isaiah McKenzie, more of a kick returner to me. But overall, I don't love their receiver room, but I do think it is solid. I don't think it's over the top powerful. And, I don't think it's a real championship receiver room. And I'd like to see it grow a little bit more. But overall, on this, offense is going to run through the running game. And that starts with Anthony Richardson. And cross our fingers, Jonathan Taylor stays there, because that's going to be the offense.
Yeah. First of all, in your guys' high variance fantasy football leagues, go get Alec Pierce, an underdog, because he's going to have some very high boom weeks with Anthony Richardson. He's a very good deep threat. He comes down with 50-50 go balls, and he's a pretty good deep threat. So Alec Pierce will have some good output weeks, as he did last year as a rookie. Michael Pittman's a really good all-around wide receiver one. I think he's going to have a pretty good bounce back season as well with the new quarterback coming in. And then their 2 slot options are awesome. And Isaiah McKenzie just to completely stretch the field and be a good kick returner. And then Josh Downs, who's a very reliable route runner. It reminds you of a young T.Y. Hilton for Colts fans. So really exciting. And then to speak on their offensive line real quick, they only have 2 weak spots now. And I wouldn't call Bernard Raymond a weak spot the way he ended the season last year. He had a lot of potential. He started rough, but he ended really solid. And then Will Fries, who is a solid guard, but if he struggles, they got the best undrafted free agent this year, and he's going to be the first undrafted free agent we talk about, and that's Emil Ekiyor, who was the only reason he wasn't drafted is because of injuries. So he could honestly plug in and be a very good starting guard as well, and Blake Freeland could play guard. So they've got options. Jelani Woods is just a complete athletic freak that we don't really see often at tight end. So I think this team is a little bit underrated, and Anthony Richardson could take them to surprising heights.
Yeah. I'm just slapping like kind of with the Texans, but the Texans kind of excite me because they're a little bit younger. And I don't know. I got a crush on the Texans this year, and I'm rooting for them. But With the Colts, again, it just feels like solid to me. It doesn't feel overpowered, doesn't feel like they have superstar powered guys, but it feels solid. And, and solid teams are scary because they're 1 week amazing, 1 week down. So it's just they're hit or miss. And I think the Colts are definitely a sleeper too.
And then this defense is honestly kind of what will hold them back. And if they do lose games, this will be why. Their defensive line's solid, though, with Kwity Paye, Grover Stewart, DeForest Buckner, and Samson Abukum. And they bring in my boy Adetomiwa Adeborie, who was, in my opinion, the steal of the draft. I cannot believe he fell that far. I had him as my number one interior defensive lineman. So that's pretty incredible. He's an athletic freak, and I really hope he gets some time in this rotation because there's some really good defensive linemen there. They got Zaire Franklin, Shaq Leonard, EJ Speed, very good linebacking trio. EJ Speed is one of the more underrated linebackers at this point, and Shaq Leonard is just a monster who creates turnovers at a ridiculous clip. And then they're breeding in Juju Brents to start on the outside, with Kenny Moore, who's going to always be their solid slot corner. He is getting up there in age. He's regressing a little bit, so they might want to bring in another slot next year. But with the cornerback 3 position, they're going to have 2 rookies, Jalen Jones and Darius Rush, competing with Dallas Flowers. It'll be interesting. I'm going to call my shot and say Jalen Jones, 7th round pick out of Texas A&M, will get that starting job. I really loved him as a prospect. He had no business being in the 7th round. I think he's going to end up being really good for this defense. And then Julian Blackmon's a very solid coverage safety. And then Rodney Thomas is their most underrated player on this defense. He's a really good, solid safety.
Yeah, there's definitely some really good pieces on this defense, and starting up front with DeForest Buckner, who's been one of the best, defensive tackles in all of football for a long time now. I mean, the dude is just solid. So, I mean, that's where your defensive front gets its pressures from, run stops. I mean, you can't speak enough good things about DeForest Buckner because he is an absolute beast. And then Shaq Leonard, who's been one of the best linebackers in the whole NFL. He had a pretty nasty injury last year. Hopefully he bounces back and turns, into the Shaq Leonard we know, but absolute stud. And then going to the secondary with Julian Blackmon and Kenny Moore, who are just solid. So they have very good pieces. The depth is interesting. I do like it. Like Adetomiwa Adeborie listed 3rd on the roster is pretty pretty amazing for him. And then another guy that I want to kind of point out and highlight is Darius Rush. You really like Jalen Jones. I was a big Darius Rush fan. And I thought arguably he was better than Cam Smith at South Carolina. And he went out there at the Senior Bowl and absolutely balled out. So I'm super excited to see him this year. He had no business being there in the 5th round. I thought he was more of a 2nd, 3rd round type of guy, but he fell. And the Colts having all these picks were able to be the beneficiary of people falling. So I do like their defense. Again, I'm gonna slap another solid grade on it. I do really like the stars on this team though.
Yeah, the 3 dart throws that they threw at their corners are, in my opinion, were all great picks. We'll see how they end up doing. And then Nick Cross, who they drafted last year, is a very high upside safety. If Julian Blackmon does go down, but we'll go into the Tennessee Titans, who, like I said at the top of the show, are the most underrated team in the NFL. Even before the DeAndre Hopkins signing, I was saying I think the Titans are the most underrated team, and it's going to be fun to talk about. And I think the Titans are going to surprise a lot of people. So really excited to get into this team. We'll get into their notable offseason additions. Who the Titans had a very quiet offseason with some awesome under the radar signings. Obviously, DeAndre Hopkins wasn't very under the radar, but that's very fun. He's gonna come in and kind of complete that wide receiving core. And it was looking like the worst wide receiving core in the NFL, and now it is drastically helped by DeAndre Hopkins, who's still very good. He was great for the Cardinals last year. He's still a good football player. He still has a few years left, in my opinion. And I think this kind of reminds me of AJ Brown vibes with Derrick Henry, Ryan Tannehill. I've said this all offseason, but I'm really excited for this addition. And I think he's going to make Traylon Burks, Chig Okonkwo better, the whole offense better. They bring in Andre Dillard to be the left tackle, which is also underrated. He gets a lot of hate, which is not really warranted because Jordan Mailata replaced him, and he's like the best left tackle in the NFL. And Andre Dillard never really busted. He was never really bad on the field. They bring in Daniel Brunskill to come in at starter right tackle because Nicholas Petit-Frere is suspended for the first 6 weeks, which is definitely not ideal for this offensive line, which is a struggle. They bring in Peter Skoronski in the first round, who's going to come in and start at left guard. Initially, he's a natural tackle, so I guess they're just going to try him out at guard and eventually move to tackle. They bring in Arden Key, who's an underrated edge defender for the Jaguars. They're bringing Aziz Al-Shaair, who was a great linebacker for the 49ers, one of the more underrated additions this offseason as well. And then they somehow bring in Sean Murphy-Bunting from the Buccaneers, who's a really good, solid starting corner who also no one is talking about. Their notable losses are truly addition by subtraction. It might sound disrespectful, but they lost Nate Davis, Ben Jones, Taylor Lewan, David Long, and Bud Dupree. So I think this team is very improved, and they're going to be in every game.
Yeah. I mean, people are kind of forgetting who the Titans are. And, highlighted this offseason by just, recently signing DeAndre Hopkins, who, just drastically improves their receiver core. I mean, if they would have had a DeAndre Hopkins last year, we'd probably be talking about them coming out of the playoffs. And people, are kind of hating, oh, DeAndre Hopkins old, he's washed. No, he's not. And they're like, oh, well, he's playing with a bad quarterback. He's played with a bad quarterback his entire career. Very rarely was Deshaun Watson and DeAndre Hopkins on the field together. I mean, it was just a quarterback carousel. And you watched what he did last year. Kyler Murray got hurt all last year. And when he was able to play, he was playing with Colt McCoy. And the dude was phenomenal, was Colt McCoy. So Ryan Tannehill or Will Levis is an upgrade over Colt McCoy, in my opinion. And so I think there's big things, coming with DeAndre Hopkins on the Titans. And I'm excited. And from the fantasy aspect, I want DeAndre Hopkins on my team. I think he's getting drafted way too low. I think people are scared by his situation, but it's like DeAndre Hopkins has never really been in a quarterback friendly situation. I mean, when he played with Deshaun Watson and he had a healthy Kyler Murray, yes, he was great. But very rarely did that happen. It was more bad quarterbacks, and his whole career has been defined by bad quarterbacks and him performing, so I absolutely love it. I love DeAndre Hopkins. I'm so excited for the Titans this year.
This is probably his best situation he's ever been in since Deshaun Watson. So it's definitely a good point. We'll get into the offense, and I'll start with Ryan Tannehill, who is definitely being underrated. I feel like people are just ready to throw him out on the street and make him retire. He still can play. He still can be a serviceable quarterback for Vrabel's team and get the job done. But Will Levis in the second round was a brilliant pick. He had no business being in the second round, in my opinion, at least. And I know you liked him as well, but he's a great prospect with high upside, and that's exactly what the Titans needed. I don't think they were too confident Malik Willis was going to work out after his rookie season, and I'm really excited to see what Will Levis can do. And it's a perfect situation because Ryan Tannehill is going to be able to keep the ship afloat. And Derrick Henry, obviously, if he can stay healthy, he's Derrick Henry. He's a legend, probably the most legendary running back we've seen in our lifetimes, and probably the last Hall of Fame running back we'll ever see. With the trajectory of these running backs coming into the league now and how the running back situation's playing out, it's pretty incredible what he's done and what he can do still. He's just going to be an absolute productive monster, impossible to tackle and game plan against. He's awesome. Tyjae Spears in the third round is an awesome backup running back to bring in. I absolutely loved him out of Tulane. He's a great route runner out of the backfield and just a really solid runner in between the tackles. So I love what they did, bringing in two good rookies to back up their really good veterans in the backfield. And then they bring in DeAndre Hopkins to be that wide receiver one who's going to tremendously help Treylon Burks, Nick Westbrook-Ikine, and Kyle Phillips all kind of take a load off them and help them develop and have less of a load on their shoulders. So that's exciting. There's no depth in that wide receiver room at all, but the top four is fine now that they have Hopkins. And then their offensive line has names, it has, players that can play out there, but no depth at all. And Nicholas Petit-Frere getting suspended is a really big problem with Jordan Ruse starting. Hopefully Dylan Redunz can get in there and start, but he's on the pup. So it's a mess. But Chigo Okonkwo too. He's a beast. He's a great blocker, a great receiver. He's going to be really fun.
Yeah. And the most key important person to this offense is Vrabel. And, as long as Vrabel's the coach, it's kind of like a Mike Tomlin situation. This team's always going to be in every game because that's just the kind of coach he is. And he just knows where to put his players and put them in the right positions to succeed, no matter who's on the field. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely some stars on this team, with the center focal point, which it has been for years, Derrick Henry, a Hall of Fame running back, in my opinion. We just don't see running backs like Derrick Henry anymore. And this guy is just different. And then complementing him, like you said, the draft pick of Tajay Spears, who, will eventually might be his successor, and who's an ultra, 3 down running back who can catch, who I really like. And then, yes, the offensive line is definitely questionable. It's they definitely couldn't afford to lose Petit Frere, especially with Ray Dunes on the pup list. It's a little messy. Hopefully Skronsky can go in there, and Andre Dillard can really, shore up that left side of the line, which I really do like. But it is a little messy, and I don't feel super confident in that offensive line. And then I do really want to highlight somebody, Traylon Burks, didn't have the best season last year, but he was actually pretty productive. He was kind of off and on, and he was injured. He kind of had an injury riddled season too. But Traylon Burks, watch out for him in year 2. I think he's going to be more comfortable in this offense, have the playbook down, and I think he can develop into something pretty special. And I love that he's learning from DeAndre Hopkins now and has that mentor in front of him. So I really like that 1-2 punch with those two. Like you said, Chikakonko, can't say Chig without mentioning Shane. That's his dude. But an all-around beast of a tight end who can kind of do a little bit of everything. And then Josh Wiley as their third tight end, who I actually really liked out of Cincinnati, a super tall dude who can actually run some pretty good routes. But I do like this offense. The offensive line scares me though.
Yeah, and like you mentioned with Treylon Burks, I think it's definitely a possibility that he is the most productive receiver on this team. But DeAndre Hopkins he's going to help him so much. He's going to take such a load off him, and he's going to help him just develop well. And I think they're going to complement each other very nicely. And we saw in that Packers game last year, he can be a beast. He can Moss, Jerry Alexander. He can come down with anything. He's a beast.
Oh, 100%.
And we'll get into this defense. Speaking of being coached up by Mike Vrabel, he's going to have this defense playing with their head on fire no matter who's out there. They've got Danico Autry, Tyler Tart, who's the most underrated nose tackle, Jeffrey Simmons, who's just an absolute monster in the interior, one of the better defensive interior linemen. There's a lot of good ones now, but he's right up there at the top. If he stays healthy, he's going to be an NFL legend. You've got Harold Landry coming back from injury, which is nice. He's definitely very injury prone, but it's nice to have him back. And then you got Monty Rice and Aziz Al-Shire as middle linebackers. You've got David Long moving on, so hopefully Monty Rice can fill in nicely. And then, and Arden Key is going to be a very solid edge rusher coming over from Jacksonville. And then going into the secondary, they've got Christian Fulton, who's been a very solid CB1 for them. Caleb Farley was a bust, unfortunately, so he will not be starting alongside him. They got Sean Murphy-Bunting coming over from Tampa, who's going to be awesome. And then they have Roger McCreary, who had an up and down rookie season, but you and I both loved him as a prospect coming out of Auburn. I think he can put it together this year and have a very much improved second season. And then the most underrated safety in the NFL, in my opinion, Kevin Byard, just an absolutely great, well-rounded free safety. He can do it all. Great coverage player. And then Amani Hooker, who's been very solid for them as well the last few years.
Yeah. Titans defense always kind of feels like it's solid. Definitely not too star-studded. Definitely don't love the depth too much, but they always play it much better than what they are. And in my opinion, Jeffrey Simmons, one of the, if not the, I'm kind of going there. Jeffrey Simmons might be the best defensive tackle in the league right now. This dude's an absolute monster, and this Titans defense is going to run around him. I mean, from pass rushing to stuffing the run, I don't know if there's anyone better who does it, all around wise. Aaron Donald's probably the best pass rushing defensive tackle we've ever seen, but all around, I think Jeffrey Simmons might be the best defensive tackle in the whole NFL. Really, really high on him. Absolutely love him. This defense is going to depend greatly on him, especially up there front. And then I do really like the addition of Al-Shir Aziz. He's a stud that came over from San Francisco. I think he's going to be absolutely fit perfect in that Vrabel defensive system. And then, like you mentioned, Kevin Byard, I have to point him out too, because this dude is a Hall of Fame safety, in my opinion. He's just been so solid for years and so good. And it's just, his play doesn't seem to, go down ever. He's just such a stud. He's so good. But not many rookie pieces they added to this defense. I mean, a lot of, backup depth pieces, and I don't love their depth right now, But I do like the stars at the front, and I do feel like just because of the system they play and Rabel, who's kind of just one of the better coaches in the league, that this team is just like a Tomlin team. They're always going to be solid on defense.
Yeah, the depth of this team on offense and defense is definitely the biggest problem and the weak point and what would hold them back. They can't have an injury riddled
Yeah,
season like they did last year because it was bad. But yeah, with this current starting 11, it's a super solid group and they'll definitely get the job done.
100%.
And then we'll move on to the division winning Jacksonville Jaguars, who lost to the Chiefs in the divisional round, like we said. And they're they're led by an absolute juggernaut of a quarterback, Trevor Lawrence, one of the better prospects we've seen in the last few years. And I'm just so excited for him going into year 3 now. It's really exciting. Him and Doug Peterson have a great connection, and bringing in their biggest, I guess it's not really an offseason addition because Calvin Ridley was a mid-season addition last year, but he was suspended for the full year. So technically, Calvin Ridley will be this team's biggest new addition, new piece, and he's going to tremendously help Trevor Lawrence. It's going to hopefully take this offense to new heights. And the way he's been looking in training camp, it looks like it will take this offense to new heights because he looks like he hasn't really taken a step down after missing 2 years.
Yeah. Calvin Ridley, I'm excited to see him. I mean, it's been a long time, but last time Calvin Ridley was on the field, he was right, and he was doing some stuff for Atlanta. And I actually had him on my fantasy team. And talking fantasy a little bit. Calvin Ridley, how do we feel about him? I don't know. You see all these training camp highlights. The dude, like Shane did mention a couple podcasts, hasn't been on the field for 2 years. It is scary, but he looks good out there at training camp.
After these videos, I can't not draft him. He looks too quick, he just looks too crisp. He looks like the same player that he was 2 years ago in Atlanta. It's pretty incredible. So I'm drafting him. I have him as like my wide receiver 18 or 19, and he's being drafted, I believe, wide receiver 21. And that's going up because he's looked so good in training camp. But I think it's worth it. There's a lot of good receivers going around where he's going, but I think he will be worth it. I think he's got a lot of upside, and I don't really see Zay Jones or Christian Kirk overtaking him as a wide receiver 1. The more I think about it, I think he is gonna be that team's dude.
Yeah, I mean, he's kind of reminds me a little bit of Antonio Brown. He's kind of the player that can take off a couple of years and still be amazing. Not Antonio Brown,
Off the
mentally,
field, yeah.
but like the type of player, kind
Yeah.
of remnants of Antonio Brown. And Antonio Brown was kind of on and off the field playing and not, and was able to bounce back. I think Calvin Ridley is that type of receiver that, he's going to go out there and he's going to make an immediate impact, and he's going to the right system, to where the Jacksonville Jaguars might throw the ball more than anyone else in this league, with Doug Peterson. So they're going to air out the ball, and he's got a quarterback that can get him the ball. So, Trevor to Calvin Ridley, it's going to be exciting to see this year, and hopefully he just picks up where he left off.
Yep. And then looking at the rest of their offseason additions, it wasn't anything too crazy. They added Dearness Johnson to be a rotational running back who's solid. They added Anton Harrison in the first round, who was a great pick. I think he's going to develop into a great eventual offensive tackle. I loved him as a prospect, super young. And then they bring in Brandon McManus to be a starting kicker, super established, huge leg. And then their notable losses are Marvin Jones. They lose Juwan Taylor to the Super Bowl champion Chiefs. And then they lose Arden Key to Tennessee. Nothing crazy. Juwan Taylor was a solid player, though.
Yeah. I really liked Marvin Jones. Thought he was a very underrated good receiver, but you replace him with Calvin Ridley, whatever. I think Calvin Ridley is an upgrade, especially when Marvin Jones is like 30-something years old. And then Juwan Taylor is a big loss, but in all reality, I think he was a little overrated. That's just maybe me. And I think the Chiefs are hurting more from losing Orlando Brown. And they replace him with Juwan Taylor than the Jaguars are with losing Juwan Taylor and replacing him with Anton Harrison. So I think their losses are pretty minimal. And so they actually were the beneficiaries of Brandon McManus. They have him on the team.
Yeah, they
Wow.
got rid of. They had Riley Patterson, who was a really good kicker last year. So I wouldn't say it's like too big of a deal. But for the Broncos, they took a big L because they released McManus. They got Elliott Fry as their kicker right now, and they didn't get Riley Patterson, who's a good young kicker who the Lions got. So I'm going to go on a rant on that because that just completely pissed me off. And the Jaguars got McManus, and Riley Patterson is a Lion, and The Broncos got nothing. But yeah, that was a disaster.
McManus he's been one of the best kickers in the league for a while. I don't know why you replace somebody who's what did he do wrong? He's just solid. He's good. You go out there and you consistently make 50+ yard field goals, which you can't say for many kickers in the NFL. So, good for the Jaguars for getting him, even though, they already had an okay kicking game, but L to the Broncos. I don't know why they would get rid of him, but whatever.
For Brett Maher and Elliott Pruitt. I don't want to talk about it. We'll move on to the Jaguars offense, which is going to be electric, coached up by Doug Peterson and ran by Trevor Lawrence, who's just an absolute surgeon, an absolute beast. He's so accurate. He can make some incredible plays with his feet, move around, and keep his eye down the field. He's just a beast. He's a great quarterback. He's got that alien tier upside. Hopefully he can reach that this year. Definitely got the talent around him to do it. When you look at that receiving core, obviously we talked a lot about Calvin Ridley. He's going to be a perfect wide receiver one if he can still be that player he was in Atlanta. And if he is, then Zay Jones is a perfect complement to him with Christian Kirk in the slot. You've got a nice gadget piece with Jamal Agnew, not too much depth behind them. Their offensive line is solid. They got Walker Little at left tackle, Ben Barch at left guard, Luke Fortner at center, Anton Harrison at right tackle. So those are 4 recent draft picks that they're definitely relying on playing good, and they have played good when they played. And Brandon Scherf, who's a pretty good signing. He's getting up there in age, but he's very solid. And then Travis Etienne, who you and I both aren't too high on just because we expected more from him. We haven't really been too impressed of what he's shown us on the field. I wish he, performed better as a receiver. I need to see more than one receiving touchdown out of him, and hopefully this year he can kind of break out. And Tank Bigsby behind him is a solid back.
Yeah. I actually really, I really, really, really like this offense. It's so solid. Your trio of Calvin Ridley, Zay Jones, and Christian Kirk is just awesome. I absolutely love that. I think they all complement each other really well. Christian Kirk was definitely one of the more underrated wide receivers last year. The dude can get vertical, super good. He's an ultra good slot receiver. And I think pairing him with Calvin Ridley just really complements Trevor Lawrence's skill set of, throwing the ball deep and getting it downfield vertically. And I think those are the 2 guys to do it. And then they have a very solid, very solid offensive line. I really do like Walker Little. I think he could grow into be something a little bit better. Ben Barch, I didn't know he was on the pup list, but he's pretty solid guard. Luke Fortner, Brandon Scherf was a great signing for them, and then Anton Harrison, so who we expect to be pretty good this year. So really like that. Evan Ingram really grew into something with the Jaguars last year, and he was able to earn a contract and super solid. So good for him. But really like this, and out of him, he's a good tight end at getting vertical. So just all really compliments, Trevor Lawrence, who we expect to jump into that alien tier this year. So really, really like it. Really love Tank Bigsby as a backup. Super underrated coming out of Auburn. I think he could eventually be their 3-down back if Travis Etienne, doesn't turn into more of a full, receiver and running back, and kind of what he was in college. So we're still waiting Travis Etienne, even though he was a really good running back last year. He was just supposed to be better, and the whole, receiving side was supposed to be like one of his biggest attributes. And we're still waiting to see that. And maybe he takes that step this year. But overall, really, really love this offense.
Yep. Yeah, and Evan Ingram is a great compliment. He's kind of like a receiver to all these guys. And Brenton Strange, they brought in the second round, who is honestly a solid tight end that I think can be a good compliment to him as more of a blocker and just a line of scrimmage tight end. So really exciting, well put together offense. We'll go into their defense real quick. Led by Roy Robertson Harris, Devon Hamilton, Faloranzo Fatakasi, and Josh Allen, who's their complete star of this defense. Definitely one of the more underrated pass rushers at this point. He's a beast. He wasn't great last year, but he's still very solid, a very quick edge defender. He's kind of like Brian Burns. You got Foyesade Oluokun and Devin Lloyd as their middle linebackers. Devin Lloyd was all right as a rookie. Hopefully he can be a little bit better this year. And then obviously Trayvon Walker, who was their first overall pick last year. Hopefully he can take a big breakout season this year because he has the upside of he's got crazy upside, obviously, as a first overall pick. So the sky's the limit for Trayvon. Hopefully he can put it together. And then Tyson Campbell, who broke out last year, is a very, very good corner. Got Darius Williams on the opposite of him, and then Trey Herndon in the slot. They got Rayshawn Jenkins at safety with Andre Sisco, who was really good last year. And then they have Antonio Johnson, who they brought in, who was a pretty good safety prospect as well. So there's some pieces on this defense. You got Chad Muma, who's a linebacker I liked as well. So some depth as well.
Yeah. Overall, super solid defense. Really like it. I mean, I've been a big Roy Robertson Harris fan. I think that's super full I can't say his name. Futakasi.
Yeah.
It's too late. It's too late. We're doing a late night podcast. You over here, you see me scratching my eyes. I can't speak very well, but Futakasi, absolute stud in the middle, and then Josh Allen, who's your superstar edge rusher, off the ball linebacker. Can't say enough good things about him. Devin Lloyd, we'll see. We'll see what he's going into his second year. He was out of Utah, which me and Dan are very familiar with him. Watch a lot of Ute games. That's where we're at, Utah. So we really think, Devin Lloyd can be something really special. I mean, we saw the talent that he, played out Utah, and he was all over the field, coverage, stopping the run. So expect big things from him in year two. I think he's really going to take a step forward. And then first round pick, Trayvon Walker, who's going to be pretty solid, and first overall pick. It's kind of weird. I forgot he was the first overall pick. But yeah, Trayvon Walker, they drafted him just straight off of traits, and I think, the sky's the limit for him. And he was pretty solid last year. I think we can even see a jump from him. And then another guy I want to highlight is Antonio Johnson, who had no business being there in the 5th round. I mean, I can't even believe that. He was one of my sleepers and one of my overall favorite prospects in this whole entire draft class. And having him as a backup to Andre Sisco, and the new modern NFL is playing DVs all over the field, as linebackers and everything. And I think Antonio Johnson can come and play linebacker, slot, whatever you need. So I can't say enough good things about him. And then sorry to point out another superstar, Tyson Campbell, who was one of the best corners in the league. But overall, this defense, they're going to be fine. They're going to be solid. This Jaguars team is good. So watch out for them.
Yeah, they really are drafting well and putting together some superstars. It's incredible what they've done. This front office has been great. And with this, we'll get into the division predictions. And let's hear your AFC South division MVP / offensive player of the year. I'm interested.
So, I could go the obvious one, but I don't want to. I want to go Mr. Derrick Henry. I think he's in for a big, I think he's in for a big bounce back season. And, think about Derrick Henry 2 years ago. He was going to win MVP for the entire league until he ended up getting hurt. I mean, this dude was on pace for like 40 touchdowns. It was nuts. And he was throwing touchdowns, he was catching touchdowns, he was running touchdowns. But I think Derrick Henry, I expect big things from him this year. And I think this Titans offense is going to run around him. And I think people are kind of forgetting how good Derrick Henry is and how, timeless he plays. So like, I don't think the way he plays football, even though he's a big running back, I don't think he's going to slow down anytime soon. I still think he's got a few good years left in him. And I think this Titans team is going to be good. And I expect Derrick Henry to have 20 touchdowns this year. So I'm going to say it right now. I think the Titans offense is going to run through him, which they have. He's going to get the touches. So, there's an obvious guy that should be the pick, but I wanted to go a little different route, and I want to shout out Derrick Henry because he's a Hall of Fame running back, and Hall of Fame running backs do Hall of Fame things. So I think this year is going to be a big year for him.
Yeah, it's a bold pick, but I definitely like it. I mean, Derrick Henry is a literal robot, so he's the one guy like in the running back in history that you just can't project a decline with this guy. You can't look at previous running backs his age, stats or anything. You just can't look at any recent data with this guy because this guy is a standalone monster alien. He's an incredible running back, and if he can just get healthy and have a full season as a starter, he's going to be like a top 3 running back in fantasy football. And if you guys are talking about fantasy, he's going very late in the 2nd round in fantasy, and I think he's going behind some running backs that he definitely has no business being behind. So Derrick Henry is being slept on, and he's definitely going to have another productive season with Hopkins coming over. I have to pick Trevor Lawrence. It's Trevor Lawrence. He's a beast. He's by far and away the best quarterback in this division. He was great last year. He was the MVP of this division last year, and I think he'll take an even bigger step up with Calvin Ridley. And I could have gave Calvin Ridley this award as well because he's going to be electric, but obviously that's because of Trevor. And I just think Trevor's going to have this offense in a great place, and they're going to go far.
Yeah. Trevor's the obvious pick. The dude's a superstar. We expect him to go into that alien tier this year. And I wouldn't be surprised if Trevor Lawrence is a 40 touchdown guy this year, and 4,500 yards because he's that type of talent. And he's also sneakily good on the ground. And so Trevor Lawrence and this Jaguars team is absolutely going to go off this year. So yeah, that's the obvious good pick. But me, I always like to go a different route.
All right, let's hear your defensive player of the year for the division.
So this one's kind of obvious to me. I'll go with the obvious pick here, but Mr. Jeffrey Simmons, just an absolute monster. This guy is, in my opinion, the best defensive tackle in the NFL. When it comes to rushing the passer and stopping the run, there's no one better all around than Jeffrey Simmons. I mean, he is a monster, and I love him. And he might be top 5 defensive player in the NFL. I think he is, and I would expect multiple sacks, tackles for loss, and I expect this guy to be, running this Titans defense, and I expect him easily to be the defensive rookie, or sorry, not defensive rookie, defensive player of the year for this division.
Yeah, the Titans had the number 1 run defense last year, and it's obvious that Jeffrey Simmons is a big part of that. He's just an absolute plug in the middle, and I'm going to go Jeffrey Simmons as well. He's an absolute monster. I think he can win Defensive Player of the Year this year in the league if he just stays healthy. He's an absolute beast in the interior. He's like a second coming of Chris Jones. I love the guy. He's an absolute monster, and Mike Vrabel is going to have this guy performing and putting up some numbers.
Love it. Yeah. Obvious pick. The dude's just a monster. So love him. Love Jeffrey Simmons. Shout out to Jeffrey Simmons. One of my favorite players.
And shout out to Jaguars edge rusher Josh Allen. It feels a little disrespectful that neither of us picked him because he's probably the second best defender in this division. He's a beast. He's a great edge rusher. He had a little bit of a down season last year, but hopefully he can kind of break out again this year. But let's hear your offensive rookie of the year. This is probably down to 2 rookie quarterbacks, so it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, so I'm going to go with CJ Stroud here. So I think CJ Stroud might be the best, might be in my opinion, probably was the best pocket passing quarterback coming into this draft class. The dude is just cool, calm, and collective in the pocket. You saw, Ohio State go get some of the best competition and just throw lasers all over the field. So I expect nothing less from him going to the Texans and, learning under a great defensive minded coach, which I think can actually help him, with D'Amico Ryan. So, and he's going to immediately start. We know he's the clear cut starter, and I like the talent around him, and I like the way that they're going to build this team around him. So I think CJ Stroud, very underrated, very slept on quarterback, even though he's just a rookie for this division. But I think he is the best rookie quarterback in this division. I expect him to get this title.
I like that pick, and I'm going to go the opposite direction. I'm going to go with the other rookie quarterback. I'm going to go Anthony Richardson. I genuinely think he's going to hit the ground running and take the NFL by storm. He's going to be impossible to game plan against. With Steichen coaching him up, he's got a higher floor than people think, and he has more tools than Hurts, like we said, and he's got all the upside in the world to put up a bunch of stats and rushing yards, and his arm is crazy. He's going to put up some flashy throws. So I think Anthony Richardson is going to take the league by storm and even impress as a rookie.
Yeah. He definitely is the flashier player. Anthony Richardson is definitely going to be on the game or on the ground running a lot more. He definitely is the flashier player, especially coming out of that Shane Steichen offense. So I really respect and like that pick. And I do think from a fantasy aspect, just with the running upside, I do think if you're drafting a fantasy quarterback, obviously go Richardson. But quarterback wise and throwing touchdowns and just productivity and passer rating, I just think CJ Stroud is a better, and he's drafted higher because I think he out of college was the better quarterback.
Yeah, and then let's hear your defensive rookie of the year real quick. This is a very obvious one.
It's gonna be Mr. Will Anderson. Too easy. The dude's gonna come hit. Yeah, I mean, talk about hitting the ground running. It's Will Anderson. I mean, gonna put him in a better system with a better coach. He's gonna be this team's number 1. And I think we're going to see double-digit sacks out of him first year. No question.
Yeah, has to be Will Anderson. Can't give it to anyone else. D'Amico Ryan's coaching this guy up is just a match made in heaven. All the upside in the world again. Just love Will Anderson. Reminds me of a young Von Miller and Khalil Mack hybrid. So really exciting. And then the moment you've all been waiting for. Let's hear your AFC South division winner.
You know, I thought back to week 18, Jaguars versus Titans, and the Jaguars were a pretty healthy team. The Titans were injury riddled, missing Tannehill, banged up, freaking Derrick Henry. The team was just a dumpster fire, and yet we're still in that game. So, give me a healthy Titans offense this year. Give me a healthy Titans defense, and I'm gonna take the Titans. This is a bold pick, but I think the Titans with Mike Vrabel are a better team. Not maybe not talent wise, but I think the coaching staff is just a little bit above, and I think how the Titans play, they're just a sleeper team, and I think they will knock off the Jaguars this year. But I wouldn't be surprised if both teams make the playoffs, though.
That is bold. I love the pick. Like you said, Vrabel does have the better culture in place. He has one of the better cultures in the NFL in place. So they're going to have a lot of close games this year. I have to go with the Jacksonville Jaguars. Honestly, I think it'll be by 1 or 2 games. The Titans are going to be one of the more scrappier teams in the NFL, and they're going to be right in this division race at the very end of it, like last year. But I think Doug Peterson and Trevor Lawrence will, in the end, win this division, and this offense around them with Calvin Ridley is just so talented and exciting. And if they can stay healthy, they can really make a run in the playoffs. And I think the Jaguars are going to be really exciting.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I love it. It's going to be so interesting, so close. Um, I think these two are just going to be going for each other's necks. So absolute bloodbath between the Titans and the Jaguars. I think they're pretty clearly above the other two teams this year. But watch out for the the Texans and the Colts. In the next 2-3 years, I think we're going to see some big things coming from them, especially with their rookie quarterbacks.
This was a super fun episode. It went a little bit longer than I expected just because of how fun these young quarterbacks are and how much we love like the Texans and Titans. I think they're really underrated teams that are going to be really scrappy and competing with teams this year, even the Colts.
Yeah, overall scrappy division, a lot to talk about. We went way over than what we expected on time wise, but there's just so much to get on with this division and discuss. So I'm glad we took the time, went through it all. I'm getting tired. I know Dan, you're getting tired, but this is a fun night talking about the AFC South.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for tuning into a late night NFL Seekers podcast. We've got 2 more deep dives left, the NFC and AFC East. So those should be some really fun divisions, probably the 2 best for last. And yeah, we got some more fantasy episodes as well. So check out the NFL Seekers podcast. And thank you guys for tuning into another. Peace.